4 years have been erased from your life, but you don't remember a single second of that time. You don't know where you were, what happened to you, or why you were released in the middle of the forest in an unbelievably exhausted state. This is not just a story about a disappearance. This is a story about a return that raises far more questions than the disappearance itself. 3 people stepped into North Cascades on a peaceful morning. 4 years later, one of them appears at the door of a ranger station, a hollow body, a face faded by the past, clutching a compass that no longer knows direction. What happened to her and the fate of the other 2 remains a mystery that sends chills down the spine. The most terrifying thing about this story is the silence. The silence of the mountains and forests, and the silence of the sole survivor. Before diving deeper into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the latest cases. At the end of September 2019, 3 close friends, Lena Mercer, Harper Lynn, and Maya Townsend, set out on a 2-day trekking trip in North Cascades National Park, a journey they had planned for weeks, as a way to enjoy the last of autumn before each stepped into major turning points in their lives. All 3 drove from Seattle to the town of Marble Mount, where they stopped at the Marble Mount Ranger Station to complete permit procedures. Appearing on the station's security camera in lightweight hiking gear, large backpacks, and excited faces ahead of the trip. After leaving the ranger station, their Subaru Outback was captured on traffic cameras traveling along Highway 20 toward the Sourdough Mountain Trailhead, a route leading into a relatively steep and sparsely trafficked hiking area at the end of the season. An independent hiker reported to the Park Service that he had encountered the 3 women on the trail around early afternoon. All 3 appeared relaxed and were following the planned route until low clouds began rolling into the valley. The weather deteriorated rapidly around 5 p.m. Strong winds along the ridgeline, thick fog, and a sharp drop in temperature, severely reducing visibility on the Sourdough Mountain Trail. Although the group was expected to return to the trailhead meeting point that evening, no one showed up. By around 9 p.m., bus family members began calling each of them, but received no response. All messages and calls went unanswered. The next morning, a patrolling ranger noted that the group's Subaru Outback was still parked in the same spot at the trailhead, with no signs of movement overnight. The families continued calling, but could not connect to any of the 3 women's phones. By late morning, when all attempts at contact had failed, and the group was many hours past their expected return time, the families were forced to call the Whatcom County Sheriff to report them missing. A call that seemed merely precautionary for safety, but became the starting point for one of the most mysterious disappearances in North Cascades. Immediately upon receiving the report, the Whatcom County Sheriff activated emergency search procedures, mobilizing search and rescue teams in coordination with North Cascades National Park staff. The initial response team, consisting of local rangers, field medics, 2 K9 units, and a drone team with infrared cameras, was deployed to the Sourdough Mountain Trailhead by midday. The group's Subaru Outback was quickly checked to confirm that all 3 had not returned overnight. There were no signs of movement or unusually abandoned items in the parking area. The drone was launched first to scan the western slopes and high-risk trail sections, but strong winds and low clouds significantly reduced aerial visibility, forcing the operators to land the drone multiple times to avoid collisions. The K9 units began sweeping along the main trail, but heavy overnight rain diluted scent trails and made them difficult to maintain. By afternoon, the sheriff deployed an additional professional mountaineering team to divide the search area into 3 directions, one team following the Sourdough Mountain Trail higher up, one descending to the canyon area near Steetattle Creek, and the third checking side trails leading into dense forest. Weather conditions continued to pose challenges. Thick fog at elevations above 1,000 meters reduced visibility to just a few meters, while persistent light rain coated rocks and roots with slippery moisture. Several suspected rockslide areas were manually checked but showed no signs of falls or entrapment. By the end of the day, the search team had gathered no solid evidence, no personal items, fresh footprints, or drag marks on the ground. The unusual silence of the area, after nearly 12 hours of searching, led the command team to decide to expand the radius several kilometers toward adjacent valleys and along the slopes leading down to Ross Lake. SAR mapped out search zones for the following day based on terrain patterns and possible hiker movement if lost. Before full darkness, the entire team had to withdraw due to heightened slip risks and sub-safe visibility. The first night ended with growing anxiety from the families and caution from the search teams, as they still had no useful clues to infer the condition or location of the three women. On the second day of the operation, SAR expanded the search to side valleys and lesser-used connecting trails between Sourdough Mountain Trail and Steetattle Creek, while adding 2 experienced mountaineering teams to access steep cliffs that drones could not observe on the first day due to low clouds. Under the sheriff's direction and Park Service coordination, the search area was divided into grid sections, each assigned to a team to thoroughly check rock crevices, slopes, and dense forest areas that could conceal hiker traces. By afternoon, one team reported finding a dark-colored piece of fabric caught on a low branch several hundred meters off the trail. The item was collected and sent to command for preliminary examination but could not be confirmed as belonging to the victims or merely litter left by other hikers. In another area, searchers noted a roughly 2-meter-long mudslide on damp soil, but there were no signs of dragging or falling, and the nearby terrain was too steep and dangerous to probe deeper without specialized equipment. K-9 units continued deployment, but days of rain caused scents to disperse and prevented stable tracking. SAR also used thermal imaging when weather permitted, but only captured images of wildlife with no human body signals. After 5 days of expanded searching, investigators temporarily found no direct evidence of an accident, such as fall marks, drag marks, or bodies, nor any signs of confrontation or objects indicating criminal activity. By the 7th day, the sheriff consulted the SAR team leader and Park Service representatives to reassess the operation. They agreed to one final search loop extending several kilometers southeast along the slopes toward Ross Lake, and rugged area but still within the radius where a hiking group could accidentally veer off course in bad weather. The results yielded no new leads. By the 10th day, with all potential routes swept at least once and no strong data to justify further expansion without increasing risks to rescuers, the sheriff was forced to suspend official search operations. The case was classified as missing under unknown circumstances, as there was no basis to conclude accident, criminal act, or intentional departure. The families of the 3 women petitioned for continued investigation, believing something was off, but authorities could not expand without new evidence or additional witnesses. The disappearance was filed as a cold case, ending an active search phase lasting over 10 days without any specific signs of the location or condition of Lena Mercer, Harper Lynn, and Maya Townsend. Nearly 4 years after the official search ended, on a morning in early August, staff on duty at the Wenatchee River Ranger Station spotted a woman staggering out of the northern forest toward the station door, her gait unsteady as if exhausted after a very long journey. Her clothing was torn, caked with dried mud and dirt in patches, feet bare and cracked, long hair matted from neglect. As they approached, the ranger noticed she barely responded to basic questions beyond trying to stay balanced and gripping a small object tightly in her hand. After being brought inside the station to escape the sun and wind, those present could observe more clearly. It was an old military compass, its metal case worn and scratched, but the needle inside continuously spun erratically, despite no nearby magnetic objects. Station staff tried to assess her level of consciousness, noting no open wounds but severe dehydration, overall muscle weakness, and slow reflexes. When asked her name, she only repeated two short syllables, haltingly pronounced, but matching the name of one of the three victims once missing in North Cascades. Lena. The ranger immediately cross-checked identification photos in the system and found that her facial features, though gaunt and altered over time, still matched Lena Mercer. The station promptly reported the situation to 911, requesting emergency medical support. A local EMT team was dispatched to check vital signs before transporting her by ambulance to Wenatchee Hospital. Simultaneously, the station chief notified the Chelan County Sheriff's Office, as the sudden appearance of someone missing for years exceeded ranger jurisdiction. Upon receiving the information and determining a high likelihood that the woman was Lena Mercer, the case file was reactivated immediately. An urgent bulletin was sent to the Whatcom County Sheriff's Office, the agency that originally handled the initial search, while the FBI Seattle Field Office was also notified to assess potential criminal elements. Within an hour of Lena's appearance, the agencies collectively treated this as a pivotal development, requiring the full reopening of the case and re-examination of all prior conclusions. At the hospital, identity verification procedures were implemented immediately. Blood and mucosal cell samples were taken for DNA testing, cross-referenced with 2019 dental records. Results returned within hours, fully confirming that the woman found was Lena Mercer. This authentication eliminated any doubts about her being a look-alike or misidentification due to her weakened state, while marking the first step in revisiting the entire prior disappearance. Alongside verification, medical staff noted Lena's physical condition as highly concerning. Her BMI had dropped dramatically compared to 4 years earlier, her skin gray and dehydrated, with widespread muscle atrophy from prolonged disuse. Low blood pressure, slow reflexes, severe dehydration and electrolyte imbalance required continuous IV fluids. In discussions with the hospital, the sheriff received information that Lena's survival in natural conditions for 4 years was virtually impossible, forcing a re-evaluation of initial disappearance theories. Lena showed signs of panic when approached, flinching at metallic sounds, and clung so tightly to the compass that it took time to remove it for medical examination, indicating prolonged trauma. However, at the initial stage, eliciting information from Lena was nearly impossible. She responded only with disjointed syllables, avoided direct communication, and frequently shied away from bright light. These behaviors were documented by the hospital and included in reports to the sheriff as a basis for necessary next investigative steps. Once the DNA verification results were sent simultaneously to the sheriff in Whatcom County, where the original missing persons file was held, authorities immediately reactivated the case and notified the FBI Seattle Field Office of the new development. Per protocol for long-term missing persons found in unusual condition, investigative authority was immediately transferred to the FBI on suspicion of criminal elements or unlawful confinement. The FBI dispatched an investigative team from Seattle to Wenatchee that same day, including behavioral analysts, forensic specialists, and coordinators experienced in long-term missing persons cases. At the hospital, they received medical reports, initial photographs, and data on the only item found with Lena, the military compass. Investigators did not conduct interviews due to Lena's mental state not yet allowing it. Instead, they established an initial health profile and requested continuous psychiatric monitoring from the hospital team to determine the appropriate time for information exchange. Taking over the case also triggered a series of reviews of old data. The FBI requested full access to the 2019 investigation records, including search reports, area division maps, collected items, witness lists, drone photos, and any GPS data recorded at the time. They also retrieved copies of the case closure conclusions to determine the basis for prior assumptions and why the search found no signs of crime or third-party involvement. A temporary task force was formed, including representatives from FBI Seattle, Whatcom County Sheriff, and North Cascades National Park Service, The task force's first mission was to create a detailed timeline from the day the group disappeared to the day Lena reappeared, cross-referencing environmental changes, human activity, and unusual events in the area over the 4 years. Meanwhile, another group assessed factors possibly related to Lena's appearance in Wenatchee, a location dozens of kilometers from where she vanished and not in any previously recorded direction of travel for the group. The central question for investigators at this point was not who Lena was that had been confirmed, but where she had been living, how, and under what conditions for nearly 4 years without leaving any trace. All data collected from the hospital, verification reports, and evidence was entered into the FBI's analysis system in preparation for deeper investigative steps. While it has happened before for someone missing in the wilderness to survive a few weeks, existing for 4 full years with absolutely no trace left behind is an anomaly too significant to overlook. This very irrationality forced the special case team to examine the case from an entirely new perspective, opening up deeper investigative directions into what had actually happened during the period Lena was missing. As soon as Lena's survival conditions stabilized, the medical team at Wenatchee Hospital began implementing a series of in-depth forensic medical evaluations to determine what conditions her body had endured during nearly 4 years of disappearance. Initial general examination results showed severe nutritional decline, BMI nearly 30% lower than recorded in 2019, virtually no subcutaneous fat layer, clear muscle atrophy, especially in the arms and calves, areas typically affected when the body is immobile or movement restricted for extended periods. Blood tests revealed vitamin D levels nearing the absolute minimum, a hallmark sign of long-term living in sunlight-deprived environments. Ferritin levels were also profoundly reduced, reflecting chronic iron deficiency commonly seen in individuals with restricted portions or inadequate food access. These findings aligned with physicians' assessment that Lena had not merely experienced transient malnutrition, but a condition persisting over many years. When shifting to musculoskeletal evaluation, the forensic team discovered a series of injuries indicating Lena had endured multiple forceful impacts in the past. The right eighth rib had been fractured and healed misaligned on its own. The left wrist showed signs of an incomplete fracture that fused without proper immobilization, resulting in mild bone deformity. Such self-healed misaligned fractures typically occur in individuals without access to medical care or deliberately untreated. In many confinement-related cases, victims are forced to continue activity or bear weight on the injured area, causing improper healing. Additionally, lower extremity X-rays revealed repetitive microtrauma in the tibia, consistent with walking under malnourished conditions with minimal rest, or forced cyclic movement in confined spaces. Beyond skeletal injuries, dermatologists noted numerous scars of varying characteristics on Lena's body. At the wrists and ankles were hardened, darkened, arc-shaped calluses with rough surfaces, classic signs of prolonged friction from restraints or hard materials against the skin. Multiple areas on the upper arms and back showed faded deep bruising, indicating bruises formed months or even years earlier rather than recently during travel before Lena reached the ranger station. Doctors also identified 3 old cylindrical burn scars on the lower abdomen and right thigh, with uniform round edges and consistent size, corresponding to contact with a fixed-shape hot object such as a heated metal rod or handheld heat tool. Such patterned injuries are not typical household accidents and frequently appear in reports involving abusive behavior or coercive control in enclosed settings. Particularly noteworthy was the inconsistency between external injury severity and overall emaciation. Lena's body showed signs of prolonged movement restriction, yet muscle tissue around the shoulders and arms was disproportionately preserved compared to the rest, suggesting she may have been forced to perform certain repetitive motions on demand or in efforts to resist mechanical pressure, such as maintaining balance, pulling heavy objects, or holding positions for extended periods. This was documented in the forensic report as a key indicator that Lena's environment likely involved coerced labor or sustained unnatural postures. In the comprehensive neuroendocrine assessment, doctors noted Lena's cortisol levels were elevated above normal, consistent with chronic stress. Her sleep cycle was completely disrupted, making it impossible to determine her prior sleep patterns. These factors, combined with prolonged physical deterioration, reinforced the conclusion that Lena spent an extended time in an enclosed, light-deprived environment with low rations, restricted movement, and frequent exposure to fear or pressure states. From a forensic perspective, all the above data converged on one conclusion: Lena did not spend 4 years in a natural environment, but in a controlled artificial space. Vitamin D deficiency proved lack of sunlight. Wrist and ankle calluses proved restraint or fixation. Self-healed fractures proved untreated force trauma. Repetitive burn patterns proved coerced heat exposure. Chronic malnutrition proved severely restricted rations over a very long period. According to the forensic team's conclusion, these signs cannot be explained by any form of wilderness self-survival, no matter the duration, and are only consistent with long-term confinement in an enclosed, low-light environment with intermittent violence. The nearly 40-page forensic medical report was simultaneously submitted to the FBI Seattle Field Office and the Sheriff's Office for inclusion in the investigation file. This was the first specialized document proving Lena survived not by wandering in the wilderness, but due to control within a closed space, marking a major shift in the entire case. After forensic medical analyses confirmed Lena had endured prolonged confinement in an enclosed environment, the hospital's clinical psychology team, in coordination with the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, BAU, began conducting psychological evaluations to gather memory-based data that could support building a behavioral profile of the captor. In the initial phase, BAU requested that evaluations remain non-interrogative, focusing instead on recording unconscious responses, anxiety levels, avoidance mechanisms, and nonverbal cues when Lena was exposed to relevant stimuli. When asked about the place she had been, Lena could not describe the specific shape of the space, but only mentioned dark, cramped, and no windows, indicating the confinement environment was likely a sealed structure, possibly underground or without direct light exposure. When asked to describe sounds she frequently heard, Lena mentioned dragging metal sounds, clanking, lock turning, and heavy rhythmic footsteps, descriptions highly characteristic of spaces with metal doors, mechanical tools, or restraint equipment. These were important environmental analysis data points, as repeated metal sounds typically occur only in man-made structures such as mines, old warehouses, bunkers, or makeshift underground facilities. Throughout the evaluations, whenever experts referenced the man in her memory, Lena exhibited clear physiological responses: elevated heart rate, body curling inward, avoidance of eye contact, and rapid breathing. Notably, when asked to describe this person's features, she repeatedly stopped abruptly without answering, but her hands unconsciously gripped the hem of her shirt or chair edge tightly, displaying conditioned fear responses. Though unable to describe his face, Lena remembered a deep, slow, even voice with a distinct Pacific Northwest U.S. regional accent, an element BAU noted as a potential geographic voice marker to narrow suspect pools later. In addition to the voice, Lena described a sensation of heavy breathing with a metallic smell, suggesting the captor may have worked in a metal dust mineral or industrial material environment. When experts shifted to questions about daily activities in the confinement space, Lena could not describe a clear time cycle, indicating the space lacked natural light and blurred her time perception. However, she recalled the captor appearing at relatively regular intervals, suggesting habitual or scheduled behavior. BAU recorded this as a sign of ritualistic compulsive control, a pattern common in control-oriented offenders. In conditioned response testing, experts recorded Lena's reactions to indirect exposure to simulated enclosed environment sounds. Upon hearing light metal sounds, Lena immediately startled, eyes widening and body curling, reactions consistently repeated, reinforcing that metal sounds were a key trauma trigger. Lena showed minimal response to wind, flowing water, or natural sounds, indicating the confinement environment lacked natural elements and was relatively soundproofed. BOE continued testing by describing various space types to observe reactions. Descriptions of warehouses, garages, or containers elicited negligible responses, but references to underground basements, tunnels, or old mines immediately caused tension and avoidance behaviors. BO viewed this as strong evidence that the confinement space may have been subterranean or related to mineral terrain. Experts also focused on analyzing Lena's description of footsteps. She described them as heavy, not fast, rhythmic, and with scraping against a hard surface, suggesting an uneven gait or imbalance between left and right legs. The heavier than normal footsteps also indicated the suspect might be a large-built male or carrying equipment. When Bayo asked Lena to describe the spacing between footsteps and accompanying metal object sounds, she said the man often carried something long, heavy, and producing small impact noises during movement. While the object could not yet be identified, this helped sketch the suspect's habit of carrying tools. Another key point was that Lena recalled no other voices and detected no signs of multiple men or group involvement in the confinement. This allowed Bayo to narrow the behavioral model. The suspect likely acted alone, not as part of an organized criminal group. Finally, Bayo synthesized psychological responses, fragmented memories, triggers, and voice data into independent data clusters for deeper analysis. Type of confinement space, level of control, captors movement patterns, voice characteristics, and indicators of occupation or environmental exposure. All data collected during these psychological evaluations was not intended to speculate on Lena's emotions, but to build a behavioral foundation to support suspect profiling in the next phase of the investigation. The compass, tightly gripped in Lena's hand when it was found, became the first physical evidence prioritized for analysis by the FBI, as it was the only object that accompanied her and had the potential to carry environmental traces from the place of captivity. The forensics team transferred the compass to the Geology Materials Laboratory in Seattle for multi-layered examination, including analysis of minerals adhering to the surface, assessment of dust composition in the metal crevices, and measurement of the magnetic interference on the needle. The first soil sample was taken from the outer rim of the compass, where thin layers of reddish-brown and dark gray mineral particles had accumulated. Under electron microscopy, the grain structure revealed the presence of three main components: fine crystalline magnetite, fragmented hematite, and a small proportion of chlorite. When cross-referenced with the geological map of the North Cascades region, analysts noted that this mineral assemblage was uncommon along typical trekking routes, including the Sourdough Mountain Trail, where the victims were last seen. However, the mineral structure strongly matched the geological band running through the Slate Peak area within the Pasayten Wilderness, where old magnetite veins had been surveyed and prospected during the 1940s, 1950s. Notably, magnetite was not only characteristic of this band, but also occurred in fine crystalline form inside abandoned mine tunnels, where excavation activities had generated widespread mineral dust that adhered densely to metal objects. The significant magnetite content in the compass caused abnormal fluctuations in its needle. The degree of deviation measured in the lab exceeded levels typically seen from short-term magnetic exposure, indicating the compass had been in a strong magnetic field environment for a sufficiently long period to affect both the needle and its pivot axis. More detailed inspection of the hinge grooves and small crevices revealed an additional layer of fine black mineral dust containing silicate and oxide components at concentrations similar to soil samples collected from old mines at Slate Peak in historical surveys. This reinforced the likelihood that the compass had been present in an enclosed, dust-rich mineral space, matching characteristics of an underground or semi-subterranean environment. Beyond mineral analysis, the forensics team measured the magnetic contamination of the compass needle using a static magnetic field device. The needle exhibited unstable deviation even in a controlled environment, a rare occurrence in ordinary metal instruments. Results indicated exposure to a magnetic field far stronger than Earth's natural field, most likely due to concentrated magnetite or localized magnetic fields from heavy steel machinery commonly found in old mine workings or spaces with dense metal. When analysts simulated conditions by placing the compass near magnetite rock samples collected from Slate Peak, the needle showed fluctuations matching the lab-recorded levels, demonstrating high compatibility between the evidence and that geological area. In addition to minerals and magnetism, the forensics team examined scratches and rust on the compass casing. Results showed numerous parallel, short, and uniform scratches on the metal surface, consistent with abrasion from being dragged or rubbed against rough surfaces, such as rock or old concrete, distinct from natural wilderness climbing wear, which is typically random and uneven. Some rust patches contained high levels of free iron ions, indicating prolonged exposure to an oxide dust-rich environment, a feature common in sealed mine spaces but inconsistent with a humid forest environment. Under the hinge plate, analysts found hardened grayish-blue mineral crusts, not natural mud. Raman spectroscopy analysis revealed signs of repeatedly evaporated mineral-rich water, characteristic of environments with erratic humidity cycles inside mine cavities, where groundwater could seep in but not fully flush away minerals. This indirectly suggested the compass had existed in an enclosed space with wet-dry cycles, no natural light exposure, and the presence of Slate Peak-specific minerals. Combining the evidence, matching minerals, compatible mine dust, corresponding magnetic interference, and characteristic abrasion marks, the forensics lab concluded there was a very high probability that the compass was not merely found by Lena near the time of her return, but was an object she carried from the captivity environment. Another key corroborating point was the formation timeline of the surface abrasion marks, modeled through oxidation analysis, showing accumulation over approximately 2 to 4 years, consistent with the duration of Lena's disappearance. Based on all results, the FBI concluded that the compass held significant locational value. It was not a random object, but most likely something Lena had contact with during captivity or found at the site and retained for an extended period. To validate the analytical direction, the FBI cross-referenced the mineral data set with old mine maps of the Pasitane Wilderness, where Slate Peak was one of the few areas featuring both magnetite and traces of man-made underground structures. The strong match between the traces on the compass and the geological features at Slate Peak led to a preliminary conclusion that Lena's place of captivity was highly likely located in or near this area. This marked the first time since Lena was found that investigators identified a geographically meaningful location from physical evidence, making the compass the guiding artifact shaping the next phase of the investigation into her captivity site. After the compass analysis pointed to a match with the Slate Peak geological zone in the Pasitane Wilderness, the task force shifted to reconstructing a possible transit route that could have taken Lena's group from the initial disappearance location at Sourdough Mountain to an area more than 40 kilometers away in straight-line distance, though actual terrain would make the real travel distance much greater. The objective of this investigative phase was to determine whether the 3 victims could have walked to the vicinity of Slate Peak under the poor September 2019 weather conditions, and if not, what mode of transport aligned with the geological evidence obtained from the compass. First, the FBI requested all publicly available GPS data from registered hikers in the North Cascades area between September 18 and 22, 2019. GPS data was filtered for the Sourdough Mountain Trail, Ross Lake, and secondary routes potentially intersecting unofficial paths. Analysis showed no hiking routes within the disappearance timeframe led to or even towards Slate Peak. The terrain between the two areas included high ridges, deep valleys, and sheer rock faces impassable without specialized climbing gear. This confirmed that Lina's group could not have self-mobilized to Slate Peak under bad weather without a guide and lacking appropriate technical equipment. Next, the task force reanalyzed weather data for the 3 days around the disappearance. Meteorological reports recorded scattered heavy rain, gusty winds, and dense fog on the Sourdough Mountain Ridge. Under such conditions, even staying on trail was difficult, making long off-trail travel across successive mountain ranges impossible. Weather data also played a key role in assessing visibility and audibility for anyone present in the area at the time. Visibility dropped below 20-30 meters in many locations, meaning a vehicle approaching or departing near a trailhead during rain and fog could easily go unnoticed or unrecorded. To visually verify the terrain between the two areas, the FBI deployed next-generation LiDAR drones to scan the entire forested band between Sourdough Mountain and Slate Peak. LiDAR penetrated the dense canopy, reconstructing high-resolution 3D terrain models. Upon analyzing the LiDAR map, terrain specialists detected an anomaly, a narrow trail cutting through dense forest in a northeast direction, absent from any official maps or civilian hiking maps. This trail stretched nearly 3 kilometers, following the lower slope of the mountain, roughly parallel to an old game trail, but wider, and showing unusually straight geometric alignment for wildlife movement. The trail structure indicated human intervention, evenly compacted soil base, relatively consistent rut depth, and turns with uniform angle changes, distinct from random animal or hiker paths. Terrain modeling showed this secret trail connected to an old service road used decades earlier during logging operations, from which access to the vicinity of Slate Peak was possible via a chain of abandoned paths. This opened the hypothesis that Lina's group may have been transported away from the disappearance area by vehicle rather than walking. To determine plausible vehicles, the FBI analyzed rut depth and shape on the trail. Results showed light compaction insufficient for heavy-duty trucks. However, the trail width, approximately 1.1 meters, fit small off-road vehicles, such as ATVs or large two-wheeled off-road bikes. Some narrower sections displayed dual ruts spaced about 70 centimeters apart, suggesting manually powered wheeled devices like carts or improvised hauling frames. Overlaying the rut model with 2019 rainfall data, analysts concluded the trail had been used around the exact time of the victim's disappearance, based on erosion levels and water flow cuts through the ruts. Older ruts from months or years earlier would show different erosion patterns. This supported the hypothesis that a vehicle was used near the time the 3 girls vanished. Since this secret trail did not appear on official maps and lay outside the 2019 search perimeter, SAR teams at the time could not have detected it. Alongside LiDAR, the FBI used hiker GPS waypoints to check if anyone had passed near the secret trail on the disappearance day. All data indicated the area was completely devoid of people. This reinforced the scenario that if a vehicle transported the victims, it operated during a window when no one was observing and under rain-fog conditions that obscured visibility. For further validation, investigators compared the trail route with the feasibility of human-carried heavy loads. Conclusion: the slope terrain, soft soil depth, and long distance made human-powered transport of victims unrealistic. This made a small motorized vehicle the most logical choice. Another analyzed factor was the area's sound attenuation. Given the valley-enclosed dense forest structure, ATV or off-road engine noise could be significantly absorbed, especially in wet weather. This explained why no witnesses reported hearing engines on the day the victims disappeared. Synthesizing all data: terrain, weather, GPS, LiDAR, and rut marks. The task force reached a key conclusion: there was no possibility the 3 victims walked from Sourdough Mountain to Slate Peak, and the most plausible transit scenario was conveyance via the secret trail using a small, possibly quiet operating vehicle under poor weather conditions. The ATV or off-road vehicle scenario aligned with both terrain analysis and physical traces, while fitting the hypothesis that the victims were taken to an enclosed location, most likely an old mine near Slate Peak, early after disappearing. From an investigative perspective, this was the first time authorities identified a logically coherent transit scenario consistent with evidence, marking a major advance in determining how Lena's group was removed from their disappearance site. After LiDAR modeling and transit analysis pinpointed Slate Peak as the most likely area used for captivity, the FBI coordinated with the Forest Service Special Response Team to conduct a controlled field approach, surveying scattered abandoned mine structures around the mountain range. The target area was an old tunnel system documented in 1950s mining records, but no longer appearing on public maps, buried deep under dense forest and accessible only via small paths revealed in LiDAR scans. After assessing collapse risks, the engineering team opened access to the main chamber and confirmed the structure remained stable enough for examination. Upon entering the first area, investigators discovered manual modifications not from the original mining period. Dust had been cleared from walls at head height. The earthen floor was repeatedly compacted from use. Advancing about 15 meters deeper, the examination team encountered a larger chamber, and here appeared the most anomalous structure: 3 makeshift holding cells, constructed from reused metal framing, bolted to the walls with old bolts. Each cell less than 2 square meters. Inside the cells were crude beds made of rough wood and flat strapping, surfaces bearing indentations matching prolonged human body weight. Along the inner horizontal bars were uniform, deep semicircular wear marks consistent with chains or metal cuffs, rubbing the surface during restrained movement. The forensics team used blue light and luminescent powder to scan, detecting tiny fiber traces and dried skin flakes adhering near these metal bars. The entire area was numbered and 3D scanned before sample collection. In another corner, under thick dust, investigators found small items, paracord fragments, a broken metal buckle, and dust-covered fabric pieces matching the color of clothing the victims wore in 2019 photos. These were carefully collected, separated into DNA and material samples for comparison. At the center of the chamber were faint footprints of varying sizes, mostly small and consistent with female feet, interspersed with larger, deeper impressions, suggesting a heavier-built man. Shape analysis showed uneven weight distribution to one side, possibly indicating a limping gait. Footprints were laser scanned for later comparison. On the east wall, investigators found a series of scratches along the rock surface, not overly deep, but created by a small hard object, rather than fingernails, likely from metal items, striking or being dragged. Nearby were thin fabric fibers embedded with mine dust, quickly identified as polyester cotton blend, common in mountaineering jackets. Another notable find was in an auxiliary chamber about 10 meters from the cell area. This was a narrow, low-ceiling space with dim light and unevenly disturbed soil. Forensics noted the soil here differed in color from surrounding areas, looser, finer, with unnaturally layered arrangement, a classic sign of recent digging and backfilling. Using probes and handheld ground-penetrating radar (GPR), the engineering team detected anomalous reflections just beneath this soil layer, consistent with dense objects or density changes in the substrate. Investigators logged the area as a suspected burial-related point. All traces around the auxiliary chamber were immediately scene-sealed and sampled. Soil, shed hair, small fabric pieces, and crushed cellulose fibers found at the edges. Preliminary mobile lab analysis showed some hair samples matched colors from the cell bed hair, pending full DNA confirmation. Continuing wall scans, forensics found multiple mechanically cleaned patches, circular or curved marks indicating surfaces had been scrubbed or abraded to erase traces. These marks showed relative timing based on new dust overlay, suggesting cleaning occurred at multiple different times rather than a single event. This indicated the tunnel user had entered and exited repeatedly during Lena's missing period. To assess long-term usage, the FBI collected air samples for organic trace analysis. Several volatile compounds were detected at very low concentrations, including aldehydes and organic decomposition markers, indicating prolonged biological presence in the enclosed space. While the exact source could not yet be fully determined, these compounds were consistent with an environment where humans lived for extended periods without adequate ventilation. Additionally, the floor near the entrance showed layers of mixed mineral dust and crushed fabric fibers, characteristic of wheeled vehicles or heavy dragged objects passing through. Detailed spectroscopic examination revealed tiny parallel microtrails compatible with repeated movement of small wheeled devices such as hand carts or wheeled frames. This directly tied to the transit reconstruction conclusion. The captor may have used a small vehicle to move victims from outside into the tunnel. Summarizing the on-site findings, 3 cells with restraints, improvised beds, chain wear marks, multi-individual footprints, hair and fabric samples, and anomalous soil disturbance in the auxiliary chamber. The task force identified the Slate Peak Tunnel as the direct captivity location for Lena and her 2 missing friends. This was not a chance structure, but a purposefully used site with signs of regular maintenance and probable connection to one or more serious criminal acts. The entire tunnel system was sealed for deeper analysis, marking the first clear physical evidence crime scene in the case, and the most significant milestone since Lena reappeared after 4 years missing. Right after the tunnel crime scene was sealed, the forensic team implemented the plan to excavate the side chamber, the area showing clear signs of soil disturbance and assessed as the most suspicious point in the entire tunnel. The technical team used GPR to identify regions with differing density, then marked 3 adjacent anomalous reflection points, one of which had a size and shape consistent with a compartment capable of holding a human body. Excavation proceeded cautiously layer by layer to avoid destroying soil structure or potential evidence. After only about 40 minutes of forensic digging, the investigation team uncovered a forearm bone protruding beneath the damp soil, followed by the shoulder bone and skull, all in a contracted position, indicating the body had been placed in a tight compartment when buried. Initial on-site analysis based on remaining clothing, a fragment of a gray mountaineering jacket with stitching patterns matching the jacket Harper Lynn was wearing on the day she disappeared, as verified by 2019 confirmation photos, allowed identification that the body was highly likely Harper. The body was removed from the tunnel under full forensic protocol and transported to the morgue for autopsy. At the morgue, forensic experts recorded several key findings. The skull showed a longitudinal fracture in the frontal temporal region, with sharp fracture edges consistent with strong impact by a hard-edged object. The ribs exhibited deformation, with some old malunited fractures indicating Harper had endured repeated violence during captivity. Wrist and ankle abrasions showed arc-shaped wear patterns similar to those found in Lena's cell, proving Harper had been restrained for an extended period before death. Soil analysis from material lodged in the nasal and oral cavities revealed mineral dust matching the composition of the Slate Peak Tunnel, confirming the detention location coincided with the body recovery site. Time of death was estimated at 6-12 months after disappearance, based on decomposition level and tunnel environmental conditions, reinforcing the hypothesis that Harper did not die immediately in the first days of the trio's vanishing, but had undergone prolonged captivity. While Harper's autopsy was underway, another team continued surveying the side chamber to determine if additional bodies were present. GPR results showed 2 smaller reflection zones, but excavation revealed only objects mixed in the soil, scraps of fabric, binding cord, and a pair of small-sized women's athletic shoes. These shoes were quickly cross-checked against missing persons records and matched Maya Townsend's size and model from her trekking trip. At the edge of the chamber floor near the tunnel wall, the forensic team discovered a 15 cm long torn fabric fiber strip, twisted tear pattern, dark green color, consistent with the material of the windbreaker Maya wore in her last known appearance on camera at Marble Mount Ranger Station. Beneath the surface soil were numerous long dark hairs, Preliminary analysis indicated at least two distinct individuals' hair, one sample matching Lina's hair color, and another longer, finer sample assessed as consistent with Maya's hair description. Additionally, the ground surface showed faint drag marks, shallow grooves and arc-shaped compressed soil, suggesting a heavy object had been moved laterally before the chamber was filled or rearranged. These drag marks did not align with Harper's body placement direction, suggesting another object had been moved in the area, though no additional remains were found. The absence of Maya at the scene did not provide a direct answer, but the evidence fragments, hair, torn fabric, drag marks, all aligned with a scenario involving Maya's presence in the tunnel and the possibility she was relocated elsewhere or disposed of by an undetermined method. Investigators noted no signs of a third person leaving the tunnel freely, no intact clothing, personal items or footprints leading to another exit. This made the possibility of Maya independently surviving after Harper's death and Lina's escape extremely unlikely. When all evidence was combined, Harper's body with signs of death by trauma, Maya-related items, and clear evidence of detention environment, the task force officially determined the case met criteria for a criminal homicide rather than a natural disappearance. The investigation report was updated with the assessment at least one victim died under circumstances of forced confinement, and the other two victims were held at the same location, with physical evidence proving prolonged abuse. Under federal standards, the case was immediately reclassified as kidnapping resulting in death and kidnapping with aggravated factors, equivalent to kidnapping plus homicide in the initial classification system. This marked a complete shift in the investigation scope from an enigmatic disappearance to an organized homicide case, with indicators of premeditation, use of a fixed detention site, and repeated violent behavior. All side chamber examination results were entered into the case file as the foundation for establishing the crime sequence, Harper's time of death, and Maya Townsend's involvement scope. The discovery of Harper's body not only answered part of a 4-year mystery, but also represented a critical turning point in the case, forcing investigators to shift from a survival search focus to a high-priority manhunt for the perpetrator. Based on all evidence collected at the Slate Peak Tunnel and data from the reconstructed travel route, the task force developed a behavioral model of the crime to determine how the abduction and detention occurred, not aiming to identify the perpetrator personally, but to establish a logical action sequence grounded in physical evidence. The initial analysis focused on the victim approach phase. The disappearance of Lina's group coincided with poor weather that reduced visibility and limited detection by other hikers or park monitoring personnel. This indicated the perpetrator likely chose rainy, foggy timing to act, exploiting natural conditions for concealment. No signs of struggle appeared at the trailhead or nearby areas, so the most fitting scenario was approach in a low-traffic trail segment where sound was absorbed by fog and strong wind. Evidence showed no major resistance at the initial scene, suggesting victims were quickly subdued by threat or assistive tools, preventing clear traces. The second phase in the model was transport. Terrain analysis and soil compression marks on the secret trail indicated victims were removed from the Sourdough Mountain area via small vehicle, such as ATV or light off-road vehicle. Impressions were too shallow for a truck and inconsistent with human footprints under load, making mechanized transport the highest probability. The direction aligned with the LiDAR-detected secret trail, allowing the perpetrator to move victims across rugged terrain without entering public routes or traffic camera coverage. The third phase was detention in a pre-prepared old mine tunnel. Tunnel evidence, including 3 evenly spaced cells, makeshift beds, chain abrasion marks, and mechanical cleaning traces on walls, indicated the site was not used temporarily but had undergone deliberate preparation. Each cell showed similar structure and repeated use marks, suggesting the perpetrator had experience setting up a confinement environment to minimize escape chances. Additionally, consistent mineral dust and floor wear proved the tunnel had been used long-term, not just once for this crime. The fourth phase was isolation and control of victims, reflected in trace distribution across cells. Lina's cell had the heaviest chain abrasion, consistent with her longer survival in the tunnel. Harper's cell showed stronger violence traces, evident in wall scratching and metal bar impact marks. The remaining cell, most likely Maya's, contained only torn fabric and the least abrasion, indicating shorter time there or removal before Harper's death. This aligned with hair samples and drag marks in the side chamber. Environmental analysis showed no natural light and limited ventilation. This perfectly matched Lena's medical report findings of vitamin D deficiency, muscle atrophy, and time disorientation. Thus, the isolation model based on light, time, and space control was established as the perpetrator's method to maintain power over victims. The fifth phase led to Harper's death. Autopsy revealed skull trauma from heavy impact, but no signs of prolonged resistance at death, suggesting Harper was already debilitated or attacked while restrained. This matched strong chain abrasion in her cell. Estimated time of death 6-12 months post-disappearance proved prolonged detention before killing. The sixth phase was body disposal. The side chamber was used to bury Harper in a tight space, with fill soil showing clear disturbance and incomplete natural concealment. This indicated the perpetrator did not seek perfect disposal, but chose a quick, contained solution within the tunnel. Drag marks and Maya-related evidence in the side chamber suggested the perpetrator may have moved Maya to this area at a different time, though no body was found. Synthesizing all physical evidence and scene traces, the task force constructed the crime timeline as follows. 1. Approach the group during bad weather. 2. Subdue and transport via ATV on secret trail. 3. Place victims in pre-prepared mine tunnel. 4. Long-term confinement in 3 separate cells. 5. Repeated violence causing injury, leading to at least 1 victim's death. 6. Body disposal by burial in side chamber. 7. Continued maintenance of the remaining 2 victims in confinement until escape or relocation event occurred. This crime model reflects a consistent behavioral sequence based on collected evidence and rules out self-movement or natural accident by victims, officially confirming an organized abduction with prolonged forced confinement, in which at least 1 victim was killed during captivity. Based on the crime model established from evidence, BAU moved to in-depth interview phase to extract Lena's fragmented memories to supplement possible perpetrator identifying features. Interviews were conducted in a controlled environment, minimizing panic triggers and following protocols for gathering information from long-term trauma victims. When asked to focus on the most familiar sound associated with the captor's presence, Lena first described his voice. According to her memory, the man's voice was low but not hoarse, slow speaking with slight elongation of final syllables, suggesting inland Northwest or rural Washington accent. Vowel pronunciation of O and A was flat rather than rounded, as in coastal areas, consistent with populations in mountain towns or valleys east of the Cascades. Bao noted this because voice is a stable, hard-to-alter trait with value for narrowing suspect population. Beyond voice, Lena clearly recalled his gait, something she could not initially describe verbally, but gradually reconstructed when guided to focus on footstep sounds. She stated his footsteps had rhythm, but were uneven. Left steps produced heavier, dragging sounds than right, creating a heavy, light cycle. This suggested the man may have an issue with his left leg, such as misalignment, old injury, or foot deformity, causing uneven weight distribution. Bao concluded this as highly reliable because Lena described it from repeated sounds in a confined environment, close range, low ambient noise, and sufficient time to memorize. When asked about distinctive captor behavior, Lena described a repeated habit involving metal tools. According to her, the man often carried a long object that made light tapping sounds against walls or floor with sharp metallic quality. Each tunnel entry, he typically paused a few seconds near the door, apparently to wipe or inspect the tool. Lena never saw it directly, but remembered regular scrape sounds, like metal rubbing coarse fabric or sandpaper. This behavior occurred nearly daily, indicating an obsessive cleanliness toward tools or need to keep them ready, a detail supporting psychological and behavioral profiling. The next interview portion focused on physiological traits Lena could discern in low-light conditions. She described his breathing as heavy, steady, and slow, sometimes with light wheezing like chronic nasal congestion or dust-induced rhinitis. When close, his breath had a distinctive metallic and earthy dust smell, consistent with frequent presence in mineral dust environments, suggesting the man worked or spent much time in oxide-rich, dusty settings. BO viewed this as matching compass mineral samples and Slate Peak tunnel conditions, reinforcing that the subject was familiar with mining areas or similar structures. When asked to describe the captor's movement habits in the narrow tunnel space, Lena said he always opened the door with a single decisive motion, no hesitation, as if very familiar with the lock structure. The hard metallic sound, turn, click, pull, occurred in the same rhythm each entry, suggesting the lock had been modified or he used precise force to avoid loud noise. After entering, he moved straight to her restraint position, footsteps unchanged, no groping, indicating he knew the tunnel layout well in darkness or very low light. This reinforced that the tunnel was regularly used and possibly renovated or maintained by the perpetrator himself. In collecting memories related to actions toward the other victims, Lena provided important data on violence level and interaction frequency. She recalled sounds from the opposite cell, Harper's, such as heavy impacts, rapid breathing, then prolonged silence. Lena did not see, but clearly heard a hard object strike Harper's body before she stopped responding, matching autopsy conclusions on head trauma. For Maya, Lena remembered less, but described Maya being removed from her cell during one appearance when the subject's breathing was heavier than usual and footsteps hurried. Afterward, faint dragging sounds came from the side chamber, consistent with soil impressions and drag marks at the scene. Lena affirmed hearing no second voice besides the perpetrators and no signs of multiple people. This supported the assumption of a lone operator. When asked to recreate the tunnel door opening sound, Lena described distinctive dry hinges with little echo, suggesting a confined space but heavy door structure, possibly steel or old alloy. She also recalled a light clink immediately after opening, as if the perpetrator always placed a metal object on the floor before approaching victims. This sound matched her description of the long tool he carried. At the interview's conclusion, Trude synthesized features from Lena's memories: inland northwest regional voice, left-leaning gait, habit of cleaning metal tools, heavy dust mineral breath quality, decisive tunnel door operation, strong dark orientation ability, violence directed at Harper, and action moving Maya from her cell. All data were categorized into 4 groups: physiological auditory traits, repeated behavioral patterns, level of tunnel structure knowledge, and victim interaction patterns. These data did not aim to immediately create a perpetrator profile, but served as foundation for behavioral analysis and suspect screening in subsequent investigation phases, with Lena's recalled features playing a key role in narrowing the search for the offender. Based on evidence collected from physical exhibits, crime scene examination, forensic assessments, and reconstructed memories from Lena, the Botcher entered the phase of building a behavioral profile to identify the perpetrator's portrait with the highest possible accuracy before proceeding to cross-reference with the actual population. The analysts began with the most stable elements in the offender's behavior: level of control, degree of preparation, terrain knowledge, and pattern of interaction with victims. The offender's choice of an abandoned mine shaft as a detention site indicates the subject had clear knowledge of underground structures, including the stability of the mine ceiling, reinforcement methods using recycled materials, and ways to avoid detection during use. Renovation traces on the walls and floor prove the mine had been in use for an extended period, showing the offender did not discover it by chance, but likely knew of it beforehand or had previously worked in similar mines. The Botcher classified this as indicative of an individual with a technical background related to mining, underground construction, or occupations involving frequent exposure to mineral environments. Next, the offender's control behavior was evaluated through the arrangement of 3 separate holding cells. the repetition of door-opening operations, the habit of cleaning tools, and the relatively consistent cycle of appearances over time. These elements reflect a ritualistic coercive pattern, indicative of a classic control obsession, particularly common among solitary offenders with isolated lifestyles and minimal social interaction. Lena's psychological profile showed the offender spoke little, uttering only short sentences in a low, even voice, consistent with someone accustomed to working in low communication or low community contact environments. The limping gait leaning to the left, emphasized repeatedly by Lena, helped further narrow demographic range, an individual with prior injury to the left leg or a congenital gait abnormality. The heavy breathing and metallic dust odor Lena described pointed to a subject with frequent exposure to mineral dust, possibly working in a mechanical workshop, quarry, or small-scale metal processing facility. The BO added residential region based on speech characteristics, an inland Washington accent, lacking urban Seattle tones, and closer to the eastern Cascades Valley area. Cross-referencing these factors, the BOU sketched an overall portrait, middle-aged male, approximately 40-60 years old, living in isolation or in sparsely populated areas, with work experience or exposure to mines or underground structures. High likelihood of prior employment in mechanical or mineral extraction settings. Possession of a deep forest mobility vehicle, such as an ATV or off-road vehicle. High control, level strong planning ability. Tendency toward prolonged victim isolation. Minimal traces of communication or social relationships. Solitary actor, gait abnormality, or old injury related to the left leg. Familiarity with Slate Peak and Pasayten wilderness terrain. This behavioral profile was entered into the system for matching against demographic data of nearby remote towns, especially Twisp, Winthrop, Mazama, and the entire Methow Valley area, where many residents work in forestry, old mining, and domestic mechanics. The FBI requested retrieval of male resident lists, age 35, 65 living in the area over the past 10-15 years, prioritizing those with injury histories, abnormal gait, or registered off-road vehicle ownership. Employment records were cross-checked in parallel, especially jobs involving rock drilling, mining equipment repair, underground facility maintenance, or heavy machinery operation. In the initial screening list, several individuals matched 30-50%. But only one case stood out as meeting nearly all criteria: Jonas Creed, a resident living on the edge of Twisp, approximately 30 kilometers as the crow flies from Slate Peak. Jonas's record showed he worked at a small quarry in Methow Valley in the late 1990s, later shifting to independent mechanics, repairing agricultural equipment and light machinery. Jonas lived alone in an isolated cabin in the woods, no marriage record, few friends, minimal social interaction, and had documented uneven gait due to a left leg work injury. Local medical records confirmed Jonas suffered left ankle ligament damage years earlier, causing weight shift during movement, matching Lena's recollection of heavy, light footsteps. Additionally, Jonas had registered an older ATV, a vehicle type consistent with soil impressions on the secret trail per LiDAR analysis. Administrative history showed Jonas once applied for small-scale timber harvesting near Slate Peak, providing a legitimate reason for repeated appearances in the mountain area. No major criminal record, but 2 minor reports involved conflicts with neighbors in which Jonas displayed extreme sensitivity to others. Invading his space, a psychological marker compatible with strong control patterns in detention behavior. When cross-referencing all facts, gait abnormality, past mineral-related occupation, isolated living, off-road vehicle ownership, settlement near Slate Peak, inland accent compatibility, and controlling personality pattern. The BAU identified Jonas Creed as the best fit for the behavioral profile. The task force unanimously elevated Jonas to primary person of interest status, continuing to gather supplementary data on his movements in 2019 and potential overlap with victim disappearance timelines. This completed the final stage of the profiling process, placing Jonas Creed as the central suspect requiring field verification and direct evidence comparison. Based on the profiling conclusion and additional data from residency records, vehicle ownership, and movement history, the task force decided to upgrade Jonas Creed from person of interest to primary suspect, officially activating the arrest plan under protocols for dangerous offenders in remote forested areas. Jonas's cabin was isolated, about 11 kilometers from Twisp, accessed via a narrow dirt road surrounded by dense forest, with no neighbors within half a mile, conditions favoring the suspect, but also allowing law enforcement to easily contain the movement radius. After covert reconnaissance using low-altitude drones and thermal imaging, the FBI confirmed the cabin had one main entrance and two rear secondary doors, all wood old construction. Outside, an ATV was parked under the overhang, license plate matching Jonas's registration. To mitigate risks of the suspect being armed or having traps, consistent with the behavioral profile, the FBI deployed federal SWAT teamed with Okanogan County K-9 units. At 4:40 a.m., under dim light and thin fog over the forest canopy, tactical teams took up positions encircling the cabin from three directions. A sniper team monitored via thermal scopes, confirming one individual moving inside, with a left leg limp, matching the behavioral description. SWAT approached the front door in cross-cover formation. When loudspeakers announced for Jonas to exit with hands raised, the cabin was initially silent. Then heavy objects fell, and the rear door burst open. Jonas fled into the woods toward the eastern slope, where terrain was steep and thickly treed. Tactical teams immediately shifted to pursuit mode, deploying K-9 on scent track. Based on direction and speed, Jonas was clearly familiar with the terrain around the cabin and attempted to use darkness to escape encirclement. However, the uneven gait made his speed inconsistent, allowing the K-9 to close distance rapidly. After over 4 minutes of pursuit, the K-9 located Jonas hiding behind a large tree trunk, attempting to conceal himself and using branches as cover. Upon discovery, Jonas offered mild resistance but carried no weapon. SWAT closed in, applied standard arm restraints, read Miranda rights, and safely extracted him from the woods. Concurrently with the arrest, the evidence team entered the cabin to collect physical evidence. Inside showed no signs of disarray, reflecting an isolated and simple lifestyle. However, several items immediately drew investigators' attention. In a small wooden desk drawer near the window, they found a Pasayten Wilderness topographic map, with numerous handwritten markings, red circles around Slate Peak, and a trail, not on official maps, matching the secret trail detected by LiDAR. Crosshatch marks indicated entrances to the old mine, proving specific and intentional knowledge of the site. A thick notebook found in a lower cabinet contained repeated schedule-like symbols, including tally marks, short entries for checking mine, door maintenance, preparing light source, along with non-standard alphabet symbols. A personal coding pattern common in high-control, low social interaction subjects. In the mechanical workshop area behind the cabin, the FBI seized numerous long metal tools, including smooth steel bars, old crowbars, and hollow steel pipes, some bearing abrasion marks matching sounds, Lena described, and magnetite dust consistent with Slate Peak mine samples. Additionally, a set of synthetic fiber restraints and homemade metal shackles were found in a wooden box. Wear marks on surfaces matched abrasions on cell bars recovered from the mine. Jonas's ATV was seized for comparison of tire impressions and track width with secret trail marks. Wheel size and axle spacing precisely matched soil impression patterns from LiDAR and ground verification. No direct evidence linking to Harper's or Maya's bodies was found inside the cabin, but the volume of indirect evidence and full profile match made the cabin a key secondary crime scene. Jonas's immediate flight upon law enforcement approach was noted as conscious evasion behavior, further reinforcing suspect profile. While being escorted to the vehicle, Jonas neither denied nor confirmed any questions, remaining silent with head down, displaying internal control, yet avoidance of communication, compatible with BAU behavioral analysis. The operation concluded at 5:15 a.m., marking a major turning point in the case as the primary suspect was safely apprehended, along with extensive evidence capable of directly linking to the Slate Peak crime scene. After arrest and transport to the FBI Seattle field office interview room, Jonas Creed maintained silence during the initial phase, answering only personal identification confirmation questions. When formal interrogation began, investigators informed Jonas of all his legal rights and tested initial reactions with neutral questions about work, daily life, and travel range. Jonas kept an even voice, minimal expression, avoided eye contact, and remained cautious. When questions shifted to the Slate Peak area, Jonas stated he rarely went up there and didn't know about any mine, despite timber permit applications and marked maps recovered from the cabin showing otherwise. To gauge response level, investigators applied graduated evidence confrontation, starting with least incriminating data. First was geographic placement via phone data. Although Jonas used a basic non-GPS phone, Methow Valley Tower data showed his device connected multiple times to stations near Slate Peak in September 2019, including the exact day of the victim's disappearance. When asked about the coincidence, Jonas replied he was just hunting and didn't remember specific dates. Reaction remained controlled. Next, the FBI presented footwear impressions collected from the Slate Peak mine, a compression print with very clear features, deeper left step than right, stride matching Jonas's left-leaning gait. When investigators placed the print on the table and read forensic conclusions, Jonas gave no verbal response but shifted posture, interlaced fingers more tightly, and avoided looking at the print. This was the first sign of fluctuation, though he made no admission. Third step was handwriting comparison. The notebook with personal symbols from Jonas's cabin contained timestamps matching handwriting in his 2017 timber permit application, and handwriting analysis confirmed very high probability match. Jonas denied the notebook was his, claiming someone could have left it there earlier, but investigators immediately countered with notebook details referencing non-public routes, information only someone who used the area would know. When asked why notebook symbols matched his ink-marked map, he fell silent, but facial tension increased. The most critical portion of the interview focused on DNA evidence. The FBI placed before Jonas the forensic report from hair samples found in the cell and on the makeshift bed at Slate Peak Mine. Although Jonas's DNA did not appear in the male-female mixture from the cell, a skin cell sample from him was found on the metal hinge of the mine door, position Lena described the offender frequently touching when opening it. Upon disclosure, Jonas first turned his head away, clenched hands hard, and took deep breaths. He objected that the DNA sample could be mixed up, but investigators pointed out the hinge was analyzed via trace cell separation, with male DNA matching Jonas's profile, while no other male DNA was detected in the mine. Another key step was synthetic fiber comparison from restraints. On a rope segment recovered from the cabin, forensics found double-twist polyester fibers identical in structure to rope used in victim cells with microscopic spectral match. Jonas could not explain the rope's origin, only saying rope is common. Investigators expanded by showing photos of metal tools seized from the cabin, long steel bars and pipes bearing abrasion and magnetite dust consistent with the mine scene. Jonas briefly replied they were just machine repair tools, but could not explain magnetite presence, a mineral absent at the cabin but common at Slate Peak. In the final phase, investigators shifted to Maya Townsend. For the prior 2 hours, Jonas had maintained relative emotional stability. However, when asked, "Where did you take Maya after leaving the cell?" Jonas immediately changed behavior, eyes darting, faster breathing, voice dropping defensively. He denied knowing who Maya was and called the question over the line. But when confronted with hair, fabric, and drag mark evidence consistent with Maya being moved in a rear compartment, Jonas gave no consistent answer. Investigators referenced a detail only someone inside the mine would know, the daily metallic sound Lena described. Jonas abruptly stopped speaking, completely avoided eye contact, and physiological responses showed loss of prior control. This attitude shift was recorded as significant. The Maya topic clearly triggered anxiety or direct related memory, though Jonas continued denying all accusation. At interview close, The FBI had established a tight chain of corroboration, phone pings near Slate Peak on disappearance day, matching footwear impressions, successful notebook handwriting match, DNA on mine hinge, same type rope in cabin, compatible abrasion tools, and abnormal physiological reaction to Maya. Though Jonas refused to admit anything, the full body of evidence and his responses further strengthened probable cause, particularly confirming direct connection to the detention mine and victim's fate. After completing the interrogation and evidence comparison process, the federal prosecutor's office officially filed charges against Jonas Creed with 3 serious counts: murder in the first degree for the death of Harper Lynn, kidnapping in the first degree for all 3 victims, and attempted murder for the prolonged life-threatening conduct toward Lena Mercer, the sole survivor. The indictment was presented in federal court in the Western District of Washington, where prosecutors described Jonas as a calculating individual who prepared the detention site in advance, carried out prolonged violent acts, and deliberately concealed the victims to avoid detection. The trial began with jury selection, followed by opening statements from both sides. The prosecution emphasized that the case rested on a multi-layered chain of physical evidence, including DNA, geological traces, crime scene evidence, coded journals, and the surviving witnesses' reactions. The defense argued that Jonas had no clear motive, no prior history of violence, and contended that the evidence was only circumstantial and did not prove the defendant's presence in the mine at the time of the crimes. To counter, the prosecution called forensic experts to the stand, starting with the geology forensics team responsible for analyzing the compass Lena carried during her escape. They presented mineral scan models and explained how magnetite in the Slate Peak area caused strong magnetic interference, making the compass needle oscillate abnormally. A 3D magnetic field chart used in court showed that the areas Jonas frequented, according to his phone's cell tower history, overlapped with high magnetic field zones. When cross-examined by defense counsel about whether the compass could have been magnetized elsewhere, the expert argued that the fine-grained magnetite, chlorite, hematite mineral combination found on the compass matched only the mineral vein of Slate Peak and did not appear in any other forest area around Jonas's cabin. The prosecution next called crime scene forensics experts. They described the 3-cell detention structure, wear marks on the metal bars, restraints with polyester fibers identical to samples recovered from Jonas's cabin, and footwear impressions matching the defendant's left-leaning gait. A DNA expert explained that touch DNA collected from the mine door hinge showed a high match to Jonas's sample and no evidence of cross-contamination. Defense counsel countered that trace DNA was insufficient to establish presence at the time of the crime, but the prosecution presented the linked chain of evidence, a map with markings for a secret trail, a journal with time-coded entries related to the mine, and metal tools bearing magnetite dust. The trial's climax was Lena Mercer's testimony. Though still psychologically affected, Lena was supported by a trauma psychologist and allowed to testify in short segments. She described the moment of ambush in the fog, the sound of an ATV engine, the dark journey as she was taken into the mine, and the detention structure. In court, Lena demonstrated the perpetrator's left-leaning gait, deep and even voice, habit of wiping metal tools, and the sound of the mine door opening, details that perfectly matched the physical evidence. When asked about Harper, Lena described a loud impact followed by sudden silence, consistent with Harper's skull trauma. Regarding Maya, Lena said she was dragged away and described dragging sounds corresponding to soil compression marks found in the side chamber. Defense counsel attempted to undermine Lena's testimony by arguing that her memories were fragmented and unreliable after 4 years of captivity. However, the prosecution rebutted by calling a trauma psychologist to the stand, who explained that sensory memories in isolated environments are often more accurate than visual ones, and that Lena's recreation of the footstep cadence perfectly matched Jonas's medical records of left leg injury, making her testimony highly credible. In Jonas's defense, counsel highlighted the lack of direct evidence of motive, but the prosecution argued that coercive long-term confinement crimes often lack traditional motives. The defense further claimed that anyone could have entered an old mine and left traces, but the prosecution countered by having the crime scene expert display a 3D map, proving the mine was completely isolated and accessible only via the secret trail that Jonas had marked on his map. The prosecution also stressed that the only male DNA found at the mine entrance belonged to Jonas, no traces of anyone else. In closing arguments, defense counsel suggested the possibility that Lena misidentified her captor, but the prosecution played back interrogation footage showing Jonas's distinct change in demeanor upon hearing Maya's name. A physiological response that behavioral analysts described as memory-linked stress. Records also showed Jonas could not explain the origin of the restraint fibers, the magnetite dust on tools, or his presence near Slate Peak on the day of the disappearances. Concluding the evidentiary phase, the prosecution presented the final logical chain. Jonas had the means of transport, terrain knowledge, prior work in mineral environments, a pattern of control and isolation, and left behind DNA, footprints, handwriting, and matching items in his cabin, all consistent with the perpetrator's profile. The jury was instructed to evaluate based on the totality of evidence, not the defendant's bare denials. After several days of tense proceedings, the trial moved to deliberations amid evidence overwhelmingly pointing in one direction. Jonas Creed was the one who abducted, held captive, and caused the death of at least one victim in the case. After 4 days of deliberation involving more than 20 hours of evidence review, testimony comparison, and expert analysis, the jury returned to the courtroom with a grave demeanor, indicating they had reached a unanimous verdict. The foreperson stood and read the decision without hesitation. Jonas Creed was found guilty on all counts. Murder in the first degree for Harper Lynn, kidnapping in the first degree for all 3 victims, and attempted murder for the prolonged confinement that endangered Lena Mercer's life. Each guilty was read aloud in the courtroom like an irreversible chain of conclusions. Defense counsel bowed their head to take notes. Jonas maintained a blank expression, showing no clear reaction, no argument, and no request to speak. The prosecution recommended the maximum sentence under federal guidelines, arguing that the crime was recidivist in nature, organized, and caused irreparable harm to the victims, their families, and the community. They stressed that Jonas had maintained a secret long-term confinement environment, committed deliberate violent acts, and continued to deny any responsibility even when confronted with irrefutable evidence. In conclusion, the prosecution noted that Jonas's refusal to provide any information about Maya Townsend had left her family unable to bury their loved one, and thus the sentence must reflect the full societal, emotional, and legal consequences of the offenses. Defense counsel offered only a very brief mitigation argument, emphasizing that Jonas had no prior violent record and asking the judge to consider his isolated living circumstances as a mitigating factor. The judge rejected this, stressing that isolation never justifies the torture, confinement, and murder of innocent people. In the sentencing statement, the judge described Jonas's conduct as one of the most dangerous forms of criminality, covert, organized, spanning years, and based on absolute domination of victims. The judge listed aggravating factors: premeditated preparation of the confinement site, use of a hidden underground structure, prolonged captivity causing deterioration, repeated violence, concealment of victims' bodies, refusal to cooperate, and near certain risk of reoffending if released. The judge then pronounced the final sentence: life imprisonment without parole for murder in the first degree, plus 40 years for kidnapping in the first degree. Involving Harper Lynn, another 40 years for the abductions of Lena Mercer and Maya Townsend, and 20 years for attempted murder against Lena. The total was life without parole plus 80 consecutive years. A symbolic sentence demonstrating that the justice system does not take lightly crimes involving long-term captive victims. When the judge asked if Jonas wished to make a statement before final sentencing, Jonas looked directly at the jury for a moment, then turned away and answered, No apology, no explanation, no mention of Harper, Lena, or Maya. The prosecutor, recognizing this might be the only chance to seek information about Maya Townsend, requested permission for one question: "Can you tell us where Maya was taken after leaving the Slate Peak mine?" The judge allowed it, but Jonas did not change expression, replying only, "I don't know anything about her," in the same flat tone he had used throughout the investigation. Lena, seated in the back with her family, heard the answer and bowed her head, but shed no tears. She had known Jonas would not help find Maya, even with the sentence clear. Maya's family held each other in silence, and the prosecutor assured them that the search for Maya would continue regardless of the verdict. The sentence was officially entered into the record at 4:12 p.m., closing the legal phase of the case while simultaneously leaving open the unresolved question of Maya Townsend's final whereabouts, the one piece of information Jonas still refused to provide. Despite facing life plus 8 decades in prison, the judge declared the proceedings concluded, and Jonas Creed was escorted out of the courtroom flanked by 2 federal marshals walking with the distinctive left-leaning gait Lena had described from the beginning, the gate now forever tied to a chain of crimes, finally punished at the highest level by the justice system. After the trial concluded, and Jonas Creed was sentenced to life without parole, plus 80 consecutive years, the aftermath of the case began to manifest clearly in every aspect of the lives of those involved. Lena Mercer, the sole surviving victim, was enrolled in an intensive PTSD treatment program at a recovery center specializing in long-term captivity survivors. Experts assessed Lena's progress as slow but steady. She struggled with sleep disturbances, panic responses to metallic sounds, and difficulty reintegrating into urban environments. Per treatment recommendations, Lena temporarily resided at a semi-residential support facility, attended group and individual therapy sessions, and worked with cognitive rehabilitation specialists to rebuild a sense of safety in enclosed spaces. Full recovery was expected to take many years, but doctors noted her resilient psychological foundation and strong family support, 2 critical factors for overcoming trauma. The families of Harper Lynn and Maya Townsend, while accepting the court's verdict as an affirmation of justice, still faced irreplaceable loss. At Diablo Lake Overlook, where the 3 girls had stopped to take photos the morning before disappearing, the North Cascades National Park Service collaborated with the families to erect 2 gray granite memorial stones engraved with Harper's and Maya's names, along with a remembrance of the 3 friends who entered the Cascades wilderness, but only one returned. The memorials became a stopping point for visitors, many leaving flowers, scarves, and notes of support for the families of the 2 victims. For Maya specifically, the lack of a confirmed body location drove her family to persist with annual volunteer search efforts each summer, supported by SAR teams and local mountaineers, as a way to maintain hope and honor her memory. On the part of North Cascades National Park, the case prompted sweeping changes to SAR procedures and hiker tracking management. The park added requirements for more detailed route registration, expanded trailhead camera systems, and implemented a backcountry check-in program via satellite radio for areas without cell coverage. SAR established a dedicated terrain analysis team using LiDAR and data modeling to detect unofficial trails, a direct lesson from the secret path Jonas used to transport victims. The park also enhanced ranger training on human-related risk identification rather than focusing solely on natural accidents as before. Within the federal investigative community, the case became a case study in numerous FBI and National Center for the Analysis of Violent Crime training courses. Experts used it as a textbook example of crimes committed in deep wilderness environments, integrating geology, magnetic data, LiDAR analysis, underground crime scene forensics, behavioral profiling, and fragmented victim testimony. The most important lesson emphasized that offenders exploiting wild terrain for concealment require interdisciplinary investigative methods far beyond traditional procedures. The case also spurred development of new environmental crime analysis tools, particularly mineral matching techniques and magnetic interference modeling, to predict confinement locations. In the Methow Valley and Twisp communities where Jonas once lived, the case caused profound psychological impact. Many residents expressed unease at having lived near a violent offender for years without realizing it. A community support program was launched to provide sharing spaces and guidance on recognizing abnormal behavior in isolated individuals, an effort to prevent similar cases in the future. Ultimately, although legal justice was served, the case left a void in the shared narrative. Maya Townsend's fate remains unresolved. That has become the driving force for her family, rangers, and SAR groups to continue the search, while keeping the memory of all three girls alive in the North Cascades mountain community. The story of three friends who vanished in the North Cascades and Lena Mercer's haunting survival journey is not just a complex criminal case, but also a reflection of very real challenges in modern American life, especially for those who love exploring nature and frequently venture into wilderness areas. From specifics like the group disappearing completely just hours after weather turned bad, or perpetrator Jonas Creed exploiting the deep forest's isolation and mine knowledge to hide his crimes for 4 years, the story reminds us that even America's most beautiful landscapes can harbor risks when preparation and vigilance are lacking. A key lesson from the case is the importance of tracking and communication technology. Lena's group carried no personal locator devices, and the absence of signal severely hampered initial searches. Today, with the widespread availability of GPS devices, satellite SOS apps, and beacons, hikers in the United States can significantly reduce the risk of vanishing without a trace. Additionally, the incident underscores the necessity of sharing detailed itineraries before every trip, a simple habit that can help SAR teams narrow search areas quickly in emergencies. The case also reflects a broader societal issue in a vast and diverse country like the United States. Individuals living in isolation like Jonas, who avoid breaking laws for long periods and attract no attention, can conceal dangerous behavior that neighbors or local authorities struggle to detect. This reminds us of the value of community connection, subtle observation, mutual care, and reporting unusual behavior can help prevent tragedies. Finally, Lena's story, though filled with loss, remains powerful proof of human capacity to survive, recover, and reintegrate after experiences that seem beyond endurance. It reminds us that even in modern America, with advanced technology and science, inner strength and community support remain the foundation for overcoming adversity. If you find this story valuable and want to continue following in-depth investigative journeys like the North Cascades case, please hit subscribe so you don't miss any episode. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video, where we continue to uncover truths hidden beneath the seemingly peaceful surface of life.